So dear Thai, dear community, this is the 7th of August. And we're in the third day of our Stourbridge retreat. And this morning's subject for me to share with you is on the subject of the art of communication. And it's also in place of what we normally have as a separate presentation on beginning anew. So I'll also try to include the practice of beginning anew in this talk this morning. We heard with the children that all of the wisdom contained in the seed. And we know that all our ancestors, going back to our parents, our grandparents, going way back to our ancestors, and we even heard how the human being evolved some 100,000 or more years ago. And we also contain other species, the wisdom of other species, because that's where we came from, and ultimately we are children of Mother Earth. So we inter-are with all of life and Mother Earth herself, and we contain all of that wisdom and consciousness throughout the time and space. And I believe, we know that Sister Hien Yim offered a presentation and the practice of touching the earth, where it also looked deeply into our connection and our ancestors, the strengths and weaknesses that we've had transmitted to us through generations. The suffering and the joy is all manifest and continuing in us. And as well as this sort of genetic continuation and all of this kind of wisdom that comes through and experience, and we have the spiritual dimension as too. So we have our spiritual teachers, which we also consider like our ancestors. So I believe that was also in the touching the earth practice that we learn about that. So we also know that we contain in us the potential to be enlightened. That is why when we offer the bow to each other, as Sister Chanduk explained in the orientation, we say a lotus for you, or a tulip for you, a Buddha to be. We know that we have that potential to become a Buddha, to become awake. And that gives us great respect for the other person, and also for ourselves, because we also have that potential. Just like the seed of corn can be a plant of corn, because the Buddha also began as a seed and was a baby and grew up. He had special conditions that we also have available to us. He was able to draw on the wisdom of his other teachers in India at the time, learn how to meditate, and was able to find what he called an ancient path to an ancient city. So he himself, the Buddha himself said, I found an ancient way, something that's before me, discovered something. So it was not something new, it was something potential that he discovered in himself. that somehow has been transmitted to him. But he needed we need the conditions for that to manifest. That is also why we have the phrase when we do the chanting, we say the one who bows and the one who is bowed to. And often we're talking about when we bow to the Buddha, when we're touching the earth, are both by nature empty. And that means empty of a separate self, empty of, it's not something unique about the Buddha that is not also in us. And that is why communication is possible. When we look at life, we realize life is relationship. We're in relationship with everything, everyone and everything. And as I was sharing, we inter-are with everything. And that is why communication is possible. The actual phrase is, the one who bows and the one who is bowed to are both by nature empty. Therefore, the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. That's the phrase that we chant. When you're really in touch with that emptiness of, there's no separation, the communication can be perfect. That's an ideal. We know that when we sometimes look at someone we're close to, that we live with, we don't always see clearly their Buddha nature. And maybe also many times we don't believe we have Buddha nature. We've lost touch with it. And we can be very hard on ourselves about that. But just even to know that it's true, even if it's an intellectual knowing, can already be like the string that could take us out of the labyrinth. You know, having some faith, you know. I don't feel it right now. I'm not feeling in touch with it, but I know if I keep to the practice of breathing, I will touch that seed of mindfulness in me again, and I will see more clearly, and I will find myself back on the path. So sometimes we need to begin anew with ourselves. We begin anew with the practice, and we say, okay, I know I'm not seeing clearly now, I know I'm suffering, but I have some trust that if I do the practice, come back to my breathing, I can restore a sense of well-being in myself, a sense of balance, and get my perspective back. Get my freshness back. So we have these experiences where we just take refuge in the breath, and we let go of everything else, and we breathe, and we are able to come back to a place of stability again. That is a kind of beginning anew with ourselves. And you'll notice that in that process there was no blaming and punishment. of ourselves. We just recognize what we need to do in order to restore our balance again and to get back on the path. When we truly invest in the practice, there is no need to sort of whip ourselves with criticism. And in fact, we discover that way of trying to motivate ourselves is very can be counterproductive. You know, always trying to kick ourselves, etc., and be down on ourselves. And maybe it works in a little way. Another way that we can sometimes use is, there's many ways we get our children, for instance, to do things, you know, and we get ourselves to do things using fear, using some sort of criticism. And we think that if we punish the other person, that will also bring us a feeling, okay, that relieves my suffering. But we also have the experience it doesn't work. We may have a very temporary relief. I was contemplating what are the teachings of this tradition that are relevant to communication. And the Dharma is the word for the practice, and we refer to it as the way of understanding and love. So I think that if that's the entirety of what the teachings are about, the way of understanding and love, then all of the teachings are relevant to communication, since life is relationship, we're in relationship with everything. That's what it's all about. And so the Dharma, the teachings, they're all relevant to this. But what are we talking about when we say we're in communication with? So I want to go to the board and just invite maybe some examples. I'm wondering if I put the plant of corn this side. Okay there? Yeah, okay. So, in terms of our relationships, oops. I already have mentioned quite a few, but maybe we could make a little list, or maybe a long list. But starting with human relationships, okay. Who do we have? Don't all shout out at once. Parents, okay. So that would be mum and dad, right? Mum and mum, okay. Dad and dad, okay. Colleagues. Teachers, okay. Siblings. Ourself? Did somebody say? Okay, so I left a space at the top for that. Friends, yeah. Children? Yeah.
Mother-in-law.
Yeah. Family. Okay. Neighbors. Thank you.
Strangers.
Strangers. Yeah. Sangha. Nice. So there's no hierarchy really, although I did put ourself at the top because that's a special one that I already mentioned. Sangha, any more? Huh? Non-friend. Oh, enemies kind of thing. Not enemies, but non-friends. Okay. I'm not quite sure how to. Grandparents, yes. So family includes grandparents, and Richard is a grandparent, so he wants to be.
Inheritance, the people who were before us. Ancestors.
Yeah, our ancestors, okay. Oh, okay, so we're talking politicians, or? Well, it starts to get politicians. People in power. Students, carers. Okay, so going to the non-human. So we say, yes, animals, which includes, of course, birds, and nature in general.
Spirit guides.
Huh?
Spirit guides. Guides. Spirit guides. Guides.
Spirit guides. Okay. Sorry, that's a new one for me. Huh? The air. Okay, so can we put down the earth as a, and then maybe Mother Earth, and including the air, the minerals. Insects. Yeah. Okay.
Sun.
The sun. Okay. The universe. There's a few catch-alls here. Right. Universe does that.
Our fears.
Food. Somebody said food. And can I? Mental formations in general, but these sort of come from the human. But I agree. It's interesting to put it down like that. So maybe emotions, mental formations.
Machinery.
Yes, thank you. So, would that, like devices?
Yes.
Phones? Oh, I see, like cars and things. Yeah, transport. Right. Transport, devices, computers. Houses, gosh. This is the most exhaustive list I've ever done. Okay. Wow, they're all good. Music, art, right. So, science. Can't miss off science. Etc. And Roger. So, etc. Yes, there's plenty to go at here, and we are in relationship with all of these. And they're all important. It's quite a lot to handle. We sometimes say when we're in, just in terms of our human relationships, like I live in Upper Hamlet in Plum Village, and I've got like 50 brothers, and it's like 50. It's not exactly like being married to 50 people, but ideally we're really taking care of those relationships, between ourselves. So we have to have meetings, and we have beginning anew sessions, and we try to have cups of tea with each other and understand each other, to take care of those relationships. And and it's true, we have a relationship, we spend time with all of these people and all of the animals, Mother Nature, and maybe we don't spend enough time, for instance, with Mother Nature, with the earth, because we're spending too much time with our devices. It looks like that when you're at the airport or the train station, you see everybody on their device. Maybe that's the only time that they're using them. I don't know. Whoops. Is it give the benefit of the doubt? Okay. But the point is, we should examine our relationship and see how our relationships in terms of how much time are we spending, and is that really our priority? Because, say, for instance, with devices, it tends to take up more time than we would really, if we really analysed it, would say that represents what's important to me. Because we do, in the relative dimension, we're not all dancing in the ultimate at the moment. Time is somewhat finite. We have 24 hours a day. And so what are we prioritizing? So it's good to examine. That's one thing. And do we take, if we go, so one thing I think is really important is to spend time in nature and connect. Because if we're not there, if we're not connecting, maybe we're taking for granted the planet Earth is always there. And actually, if we lose our connection with nature, we start to even think it's not something of value. It's not a real important thing. We don't have a sense of connection with it. We lose that connection, and we just maybe even think it's something there for us to exploit only, and that unfortunately kind of is what's happening, as we heard Sister Annabelle sharing on that subject too yesterday. So spending time is a very important aspect. What time are we giving? And also, somebody mentioned food, for instance. We all eat 3 times a day, or roughly. Maybe we snack in between. I always remember my favourite Homer Simpson cartoon was when he got the award for putting on the most weight when his school reunion. And he was very proud, and he held up the prize, and he said, I discovered a meal between breakfast and brunch. So maybe we enjoy eating a lot, but sometimes our relationship with food can be something dysfunctional, we say. Like we eat in order to cover our emotions. We know that. We go for the chocolate. I mean, it'd be fair trade and organic, of course, but nevertheless, it's very helpful for those little sinking moments to pick us up. But sometimes we are very our relationship with food. It's that we call it a love-hate relationship or something. So maybe because we want to look thin, but we keep on eating in between times. And sometimes we can get, one of the conditions of anorexia and things like this at the extreme end of a bad relationship with food. This is our relationship to music and children. So when we are doing eating meditation, it's also a kind of beginning a new practice of like noticing what is coming up for us when we're eating, and noticing our relationship with food, and actually turning it into something very beautiful, in the sense of recognizing that all we say, the 5 contemplations, the food is a gift of the whole universe. So we have the universe down here, and all of the conditions, we can look into our carrot and see the stars. We can look into our broccoli and we see all of this incredible wisdom that allows this amazing broccoli to be there before us, and the vividness of the colors. And when we chew, we can chew, instead of chewing our thinking, we're chewing emptiness. We're chewing this amazing connection between us and the world. And so we can turn our relationship with food into something very beautiful, and nourishing ourselves and getting that carrot power to do lots of good things in the world. So it's not just about time, but it's about our way of paying attention to the thing that we're in relationship with. So likewise on our devices, and somebody mentioned how we couldn't be here without transport, we can appreciate the good things and we can use things well, but are they serving us, or are we kind of serving something else? So often with the relationship with electronics, etc., in the end it's very easy for us to fall into the trap of serving the needs of the advertising industry, because we are basically just clicking and we're following that curiosity and getting absorbed, and that's how it's sort of designed to sort of lure us into that kind of habit energy, where basically what's being sold is our attention. It's like our attention becomes a commodity. And do we want to be in that kind of relationship where we're being, in a sense, used like that? So taking back the power is part of what this is about when we look at our relationships, but also recognizing the good aspects. So that's just using an example of devices. But when we go to our human relationships as well, if we're not in good relationship, how much does that matter to us? Do we care enough? Or are we more interested in just being right and judging the other person? Do we really value the relationship? Do we see how important it is? And if we have not been in connection truly with that person for a while, we may write them off. I don't need that person in my life. But when we meditate and we bring that person to mind that is in our life, even they are a neighbor, even they are a colleague at work that we can kind of avoid, if we bring them into our mind, we may realize that they do mean something to us, and they are important to us, and there's no need for us to be in bad relationship. We can let go of some of the difficult things and just come into a bigger space, and because once we recognize that actually that relationship is precious to us, we have the small thing that irritated us is in a bigger space. They may have that irritating, that thing that they did that we disapproved of or hurt our feelings, but we when we're in touch with the importance of that relationship, it gives us much more willingness and energy to accept them. And that acceptance is another key term. We come across this in the practice of meditation. We recognize what is there and we accept, we embrace. So we embrace and we include what is there in our heart. We allow that to be present. We say, it's okay, I don't exclude you. So when we are, supposing there is somebody close to us and they have made us angry, really angry, and we are really upset, we may be in a situation where, like Sister Annabelle shared about the snake, that we're not ready to deal with it. It's a bit too big. We're too angry, but we name it. We say, "Oh, I'm angry right now," and we maybe even, depending on our relationship with that person, be able to say to that person, "I'm a bit angry about what happened, and I need some time." So you're naming it, you're recognizing it. I need some time to take care of myself, but I would like to, at some point, come back and maybe we can share at a later date to begin anew together. So you already put the aspiration there to begin anew. But you haven't got to this stage of accepting everything, but you've recognized the situation. You've let the other person know that you need some space. And then, as with the practice of that's been shared, you take care of your anger in your own way, in your own time, with the practice of walking or breathing, embracing. And maybe you need to share with somebody what's going on for you, to help you to share the problem a bit, but all the time with the intention of going in the direction of beginning anew with that person. So even at that time, you're still dealing with the anger. So we shared about, because when you go to the person and you want to restore communication, you want to restore connection with that person, and you want to be able to offer a cooked potato, not a raw potato. That's the ideal. If the person has the capacity to help you cook the potato, they can cook it with you, then that's also, then maybe you can go with a bit. But it's always nice to have done a little bit of cooking in advance. A parboiled potato is better than a completely raw potato. And so in this way, we can see the importance of coming back to somebody even we have irritation and anger. So this is, and it can also be for ourselves. We can have irritation, we can be upset with ourselves. And I shared about how to recognize when you're giving yourself a hard time and turn that into a bell of mindfulness, and gradually there's many ways in which we can use the practice to restore, but I think it comes back to this key of intention, of seeing that I want to go in this direction, and the other key of this somehow innate knowledge that we can, I'm more than that. I don't have to stay stuck in that small definition that I've created of myself or of the other person. So when we talk about beginning anew with ourselves, Thai offered a very nice, very simple but effective image of a circle with an arrow pointing inwards. So this is to represent ourself coming back to ourself. It's quite simple. When we learn how to come back to ourselves, that is what we need. We're taking care of what is there in the ways that have been shared. When we have done that, we've taken care of ourselves, we are in a position to go to other people and I would suggest in your own family and help them to also come back to themselves. Not by preaching to them how to do it, but by example, because you did it for yourself, and they will respond to that in some way. And then when you have, if you can have people in your family willing to sit down and do the beginning anew practice, that's a beautiful thing. We're going to go on to a little bit how the beginning anew practice works, but when this has happened, and this is in the family, then maybe you can extend your support and you're more solid to offer an example and an inspiration for people outside the family circle, maybe people at work, colleagues. And you may be the one, maybe it's at your school, to organize a session with colleagues where you begin anew. Not necessarily, and you at the beginning of the beginning anew, you invite them with the bell, you invite people to come back to themselves and breathe a little bit to calm. Many people in business have found this very effective, and of course they use the language that works in the environment that they're in. So what is the beginning anew practice that I'm talking about when we come to other people? So this is the basic stages. You know, you start with yourself, parents, colleagues, and also all our relationships. But that come into our life, we can examine them. But this beginning anew practice, I keep mentioning, I'm going to share. Actually, the parents are going to do with the children this evening, I believe. So this is a particular practice that we offer in Plum Village, and it's quite simple, but again, simple to talk about, not always so easy to do. But it begins with what we call flower watering, and you could say this is the aspect of nourishing happiness. Flower watering, another term for it is expressing appreciation. So it just means to say that you take time to recognize the things that you appreciate about the other person, and you share them. When we do a beginning anew practice in Plum Village, we actually sit down in a circle, we have some flowers in the center, we have a bell, and we do it in a sort of formal way. We can do it in that formal way. Sanghas sometimes do it with each other, and they go round and people bow in just like you've experienced in the Dharma sharings, and they take time to express appreciation for other people in the group, or it could be in your family. And as I said, the parents and the two children will do for each other this evening. Just expressing their appreciation is already an amazing practice. So in order to express appreciation for someone we love, we make ourselves first present. We're present in ourselves. We bring the person to mind, our loved one. And we recognize that they are precious in our life. And then we maybe let them know that. You're precious to me. I'm so grateful for you. But when we really feel it. So this is the basic flower watering, is to let them know that their presence in your life means a lot to you. That's the most basic thing we can say. And it's a way of saying, I love you. We have a mantra, I know you are there and I am very happy. So that is words that you can, when you say that and you mean it, it's very powerful. In order to mean it, you have to feel it, you have to, in a sense, meditate to really check in and say, yes, that's true. I really appreciate you in my life. And then when you can say that authentically, even there are some difficulties going on in the relationship, but you can still see the wood for the trees, you can still see the blue sky behind the clouds, and you say, even though, you don't need to say the even though, but for yourself, because that wouldn't start well. But you say, you're in touch with that appreciation. And then you can also give some specific qualities of that person or specific actions that they have done that have brought you happiness in your life, that bring you happiness, that you really appreciate them for. And that is what we call flower watering. It's a bit like we have to water the seed of corn for it to grow. In a business environment, maybe you just say expressing appreciation more. Flower watering might not be the right term. But that is the basic first fundamental practice, is to learn how to water flowers. And it requires us to stop, contemplate the person, the relationship, feel the preciousness and connect with them, and then express like that. There is a second stage in the practice. By the way, this flower watering practice we can do quite safely without it needing to be formal. So you can go to somebody, but do it authentically. So, it's a bit like bowing on the move. If you just do a very quick flower watering as you're passing, it's not as powerful as when you really stop, make yourself present, connect with the person, and really look them, get the eye contact, and then let them know. It can be something very simple, but then can be very powerful. And actually we can be quite afraid of that. I've often heard in Dharma sharing groups when they've had this practice presented, that scares me. That level of intimacy, that I would stop and look at somebody and connect with them and share even something very simple to say I appreciate them. That can be, you feel vulnerable. You feel it takes some courage. So if you recognize that that's a bit scary for you, good, you've recognized it. And the next step is to do it anyway. To take the step and make the experience. What's the worst that could happen? It's not that difficult, but it can make a big difference. and it can open up possibility of connection in a way that can be very beautiful. But yeah, basically flower watering, we don't do enough of it. I don't want to say it's just the British, because I think, you know, the more I connect with other cultures, I find it's similar in but there are some cultures which are much more expressive emotionally, though. Like I'm thinking of the Spanish groups in the summer. But we have our own way, but we can maybe be a bit stiff sometimes with each other. So it's important to recognize that and say, well, that's not serving this relationship very well if I just stay kind of without a bit distant from people. So warmth and connecting with people is a beautiful thing, and so we should smile. We, as Sister Chanduk said, we learn to smile to ourselves, but we also have that smile then to offer to other people. Smile of appreciation, of acceptance, and expressing appreciation. And there is a second stage to the beginning a new practice, and this again equally applies to all of these relationships, including ourselves, and that is to express regret. For no particular reason, I'm going to ask for a sound of the bell. But maybe, since it's just at this point, we could be in touch with, you can choose to be in touch with something you appreciate about yourself. And while we're sitting silently, can we also be in touch with a regret that we have towards ourselves? So when we recognize that we have a regret, we can make an inner vow to walk in the other direction. We don't have to, and once we've done that, we don't need to be hard on ourselves about it. Because we've begun anew, we've recognized it, we've expressed our regret, and we know there is a way we can do to counteract that and to go in another direction. But it can be very important to recognize in ourselves the regrets we have. It may be in relation to how we are with ourselves or how we have been with somebody else. So if we're communicating with somebody else and we want to express a regret, that can be very, very beautiful. It can be maybe something small, like, the other day I came back and I didn't take the time with you I wanted to do, and I shared a bit shortly with you, and something or you felt that the way you shared something was not skillful. Or it may be something big, you really did something very strong, and you want to express your regret for that. And when it's sincere, the other person can feel that, and they will also they'll be moved and maybe also share that they too have a regret, etc. Sometimes we're waiting for the other person to express the regret first. We would like to express regret, but we want to hear them express their regret first, and we don't want to be the first. We say, you've made me suffer, and that's why I made you suffer in return. So you started it, so I want you to start with the regret. But that way doesn't lead. We have to sort of break the embargo on that and say, no, I'm going to be generous and big of heart and express my regret without expectation, in fact, that you're going to, I say it genuinely, this is my regret. And it helps you when you do that. You feel more free. Free from the expectation as well of expecting it back from the other person. And you instead just feel free because you genuinely did have that regret, regardless of whatever you're putting on the other person. Yeah? And then you can often be surprised, and pleasantly surprised, that they also then wish to express regret. I had one person come to me for a consultation, and she shared that she'd been angry with her mother for 40 years. And her mother had died 20 years ago. And she was still angry with her mother. And how could she possibly do the beginning a new practice? And in fact, I'd given a teaching on letting go. How could she let go when her mother had died and passed away? It was not possible. And so I found myself expressing regret on behalf of her mother. First of all, I expressed appreciation for her. Actually, first of all, I kind of got the story of what had happened, so I really understood where the anger had come from. And I understood what had happened in this relationship with the mother and the events. And then, as her mother, I shared how much I appreciated her as my little girl, and she didn't deserve not to have had that love and that attention that she lacked. And she didn't deserve that incident that happened and that kind of things that happened. She also expressed regret for the things that had happened. So there was, when she could hear that from her mother, even though it was coming from me, she suddenly released and said, wow, now that I've heard my mother expressing the love and the regret, I now want to express my regret to my mother, because I have held this anger, and now that I've heard that, I realize my holding on to the anger was part of the problem and kept us apart, and I've lost so much, and I'm so regretful that I held the anger in that way and I couldn't. Yeah, it was sometimes we need to somehow hear appreciation and the regrets of our parents, even if they're not with us, in order to let go ourselves and to move on. But maybe we're never going to hear that from the actual historical person that may have died or may still be with us, because that parent may still be stuck in their way of seeing. But to know that ultimately that person, that parent is for sure, as your mother, as your father, when they get the right perspective, they will for sure want to express their appreciation for you as their daughter, as their son, and they will for sure want to express their regret. You can allow that in, and then you may also find then you can be in touch with your side of it. But it seems to need to work in that order. So maybe also, if you're finding it very, very difficult with your partner, is to know that they have many causes and conditions which are preventing them from being able to express their regret at this time, or even express appreciation. And you maybe know some of those causes and conditions. Maybe you're one of those causes and conditions. Or maybe, but there's always many, there's always a million causes and conditions for why that's happening right now. So it's not... So with that understanding, you can know that if they were able to be free from that, that they would be able to express appreciation, they would express their regret. So you can kind of, with that knowledge, it's a bit like knowing that the seed can become the plant of corn. You know that they have Buddha nature deep in them, and then you forgive that they're not able to express that at this time. And then you can do your part of expressing your regret. That's one way to help you overcome your frustration with the other person, that they're not able to be who you feel that they should be able to be at this time. Thai has often said that forgiveness is not something you do, it's a fruit of understanding. So when we understand that the causes and conditions in the other person that gave rise to this behavior, we naturally forgive. It becomes a fruit of understanding those causes and conditions. And likewise for us too. When we understand, if we are very hard on ourselves for something that happened, I remember I had a close member of family commit suicide, and I was very hard on myself for not doing things that I thought maybe I could have done to help it not happen. So when something like suicide, we're not just dealing with the loss and the grief, we're also dealing with the a kind of feeling that we should have done something. And I always remember Sister Gina shared with me, like, if you can really look deeply into all the causes and conditions, for her to do that, and for you to have also responded or not responded, not done what you felt you could have done, if you can look and understand those causes and conditions, then it'll help you let go of the feeling that you could have done more. And it will also mean that for the next time, because you've understood that, you can do something differently the next time. So you begin anew with yourself in that way. The third stage of beginning anew is expressing difficulty. Expressing a difficulty. And generally speaking, when we introduce the practice of beginning anew, we always say, stick to flower watering and expressing regret, and the rest will take care of itself. It's often just by getting that perspective back that the difficulty it resolves by itself. And this is my experience, but you have to make it yourself. But I'm sure we've all had an experience of that. Something dissolves once we get the communication going. We didn't need to address directly the difficulty. The difficulty may be all we can see, so it's sort of right in front of our eyes. And the image I sometimes give is like when you zoom out and you see that the difficulty is still there, but there is much more space around it. It's no longer just all your narrowness of viewing. You've expanded. So you see when you contemplate the person you're having a difficulty with, or there's something difficult happened, you remind them of that they are precious in your life. You remind yourself that they are precious to you, and you remind yourself or bring to mind their good qualities. It brings you joy, and it brings you appreciation and gratitude, and that brings a lot more space for this difficulty. And also when you see your side of things and you've expressed your regret, you identify what is your regret about this in this circumstance, in this relationship. So you may not need then to go directly to the difficulty, but if you choose to, that can be wonderful too. It can be a way of exchanging information with the other person so that they can really, and there's a way of doing it which doesn't cause more difficulty, and there's a way of doing it which causes more difficulty. So you can express a difficulty and make it worse. I think we've all experienced that. And there is a way of expressing a difficulty which helps. Yeah. So one of the ways to make sure that expressing your difficulty with the other person doesn't make it worse is to first of all do the first two stages. Flower watering, expressing appreciation, and expressing regret. And even you do that as a mental exercise first. This will also has the effect of giving that when you express these things first, the other person has more trust in what you may then say. They trust that you love them. They trust that you see them as a whole, and you're not just seeing that difficulty. And that helps them receive what you're saying. It becomes much easier. So, what I mean by also when you come to express a difficulty, using language which doesn't blame is the key. But rather, in a way, accept your responsibility for the difficulty. You know, this is my difficulty that has arisen, got triggered in this situation, and I want to let you know that it's been difficult for me in relation to what happened. But you're not necessarily blaming them for what happened. You're saying, but you're letting them know it's difficult for you, and you would like to let them know so that they can support you in transforming that, in taking care of that difficulty. So if you see it as an exercise in communicating information that's going to be helpful for the relationship, you're safer. Rather than as an exercise in getting out your pain and your blame towards them. That said, if you are on the receiving end and you are a practitioner and you hear somebody expressing blame and pain towards you and giving you lots of uncooked potatoes, maybe dolloping some mud and saying, could you please turn this into a lotus at your foot? If that's happening and you see that you have the capacity to, you're not getting, if you can, you try to be in touch with compassion for that person and knowing actually this could be the opportunity for your relationship to be renewed, because you're giving them the opportunity to express something, even if it's unskillful, but you're in touch with compassion for them and you're allowing them to express. And your focus, your attention is on compassion, is on giving that person a chance to, maybe they've never had it before, to express what's going on for them and to put down their burden, if you like. If you can do that. But when you're expressing the difficulty, because you're a practitioner, just to know that the more you can do the cooking before, and the more you can prepare, you can offer a more beautiful dish, and it's easier to both receive, and it's less likely to give rise to more difficulties. The other thing, I do this thing of flipping the board. So I think that maybe the last thing I'll share is about perceptions. So I always find this a funny quote. The Buddha said that 90% of our perceptions are wrong. Because I think India, they had a lot of mathematics going on, but I don't know about I can't imagine the Buddha saying percentage, but percent, But anyway, the point is the vast majority of our perceptions are wrong. If not 100%, in some way they're going to be distorted. They're not going to be reflecting the actual reality. And when we are humbled to this, we are free. We're never going. It's very rare that we're going to see something actually as it is. We have those. If we're part-time Buddha, we can have those moments of lucidity where we really see things clearly. And particularly when we're involved in a relationship, it's quite easy to see, when two other people have a difficulty, to say, oh, but I see his point of view as well, and I see both, I love both of you, but that's because you're not involved, right? But when you're involved, it's very difficult to see that, to have that clarity. So but it's important that's normal, that's natural, but it's important to recognize that your emotional state, the expectations you have of the other person, how much you're invested in it, that all of these things are going to distort the way you see it and distort how much space you're giving the other person to be who they are. And they are going to change your actual way of perceiving it. And by definition, we believe our perceptions because it is what we're perceiving. So meditation and mindfulness give us the opportunity to ask the question, are you sure? And that's the special thing that we have going, is that we can actually question our perceptions. We can question ourselves. And that's just a beautiful thing to be able to do. If our perception, we identify our self-worth with that perception, then it's going to be more difficult to question it. If we somehow are invested in that perception. But it can be all the more fruitful to question it. When we say, are you sure? A bit like when Sister Annabelle said, your idea of happiness might be the very thing that you would benefit from letting go of. It may be based on a wrong perception. So this is if I get this person, or if I keep this person in my life, that's my condition for happiness for the future. Or I need to separate from this person, that's my condition for it. It could be either way, whatever it is for you. are you sure? Is that really what it's going to bring the happiness? Or is something going to repeat because actually something else needs to change? It's maybe another condition that you need. But to question our perceptions is the thing. I've found quite useful a little diagram here. 2 circles. The first circle represents what happened. An event in our life marked by this cross is what happened. And correspondingly, in the other circle, is our perception. And it could also call this what we made it mean. So something happened, and you made it mean something, and you developed a perception based on that meaning that you gave it. And what you made it mean, as I said before, has a lot to do with many causes and conditions about how you view yourself and how you view the world, how you view the other person. Many things are coming into that, and it may be give you a very distorted view of reality about the situation. What happened, the event and the perception almost happen at the same time. It's almost impossible to just something happened, especially when it has emotional content or it's significant in your life, for you not to give it meaning. And you do it automatically. We all do. We all immediately give something meaning, and that's fine. But to recognize that that's what happened can be very helpful in understanding the nature of perceptions. And then to be able to go back and tease apart what happened from what we made it mean can be very helpful. It's not necessarily that you don't believe this, but you just notice the difference. This is actually what happened, and this is what I made it mean. And they're 2 distinct things. Even if you still believe this, just to see that these are 2 distinct things can be very helpful. One young girl came to me in the Wake Up retreat and said, "My mother told me I am selfish from when I was very young." And what she made that mean was, believe it or not, I am selfish. She actually, she took it in and said, "Oh, I'm selfish." Instead of but actually what happened was her mother said, "You are selfish." And she made that mean, I am selfish. Do you see the distinction? It's not necessarily true. How can a child be given... And on top of, I am selfish, I am a bad person. I am not worthy. Lots of things got layered on top of that. Lots of messages. And I said, guess what? Your mother probably was told by her mother that she was selfish. And she's transmitting something, some suffering. It's not you that's, and you've taken it on. And you've assumed that what happened is you've not separated those 2. So this can be useful. Somebody, maybe your father hit you when you were young. What did you make it mean? Understanding the causes and conditions helps us realize that doesn't necessarily mean that you deserve that you're a bad person, or even that your father is bad. So it can be useful to make that distinction. There's a teaching of the Buddha, very simple. Man comes across a snake on the path. And then he discovers it was a rope. It's just he had a perception it was a snake, but it turned out to be a rope. And we're doing that all the time. We're seeing snakes where actually there's ropes. Whenever we are able to unravel something and tease apart things and see the conditions and do that work, we can often realize, oh, this isn't quite what I thought. There's much more to it than that. I don't have to be so afraid. So I think that's a little bit on the nature of perceptions, and questioning ourselves and asking ourselves, are we sure, can be very helpful. And the beginning a new practice is something we can do formally, as I shared, or informally, and we can very much benefit from it. And we do it with ourselves, we do it with our children and our family. And we can do it somewhat internally, as well as, it's often good to practice it as a mental exercise in your meditation. So I've sometimes, you just bring to mind somebody that maybe you're having a difficulty with, or maybe you start with somebody you really get on with, or somebody you very much love. And you bring them to mind, and they can bring you happiness, and they can, in your mind, they can bring up gratitude, can be a good way to refresh yourself. And then maybe you can move then to the person that you're having some difficulty with and try and do the same process. And because you've maybe nourished the happiness of being in touch with people that are easy and in your life and that bring you a lot of joy, you have more space to then bring that difficult person into your mind. And then, with that goodwill and bigger space that you've generated for that person, maybe you can go to them and express something very simple that lets them know, actually you appreciate them in your life, despite. And you don't even necessarily have to touch the difficulty, but you can restore communication and things maybe go in a better direction. Because otherwise, the simpler, the way that we often choose is, I don't need you, and you kind of cut the other person off. You close your heart to them. You maybe have a functional relationship with them. You may be able to speak very professionally. You're able to get by in how much you need to communicate, but you know that you've closed your heart off to them. And so this is a shame, because in fact what we discover is when we do that, we lose some of our own aliveness. Every time we close our heart a bit on somebody, we lose something of our own aliveness, and we lose connection with life, because we are all into R. And if we're doing with that with one person, somehow it affects more than that. They say if you become numb to your emotion because it was too much to deal with, and you want to become numb to a negative emotion, the effect is you also become numb to positive emotions too. You can't have one without the other. So becoming numb and closing off our heart is not a good way. We have to learn. But we also want to do this skillfully and gently with ourselves, knowing our limits, and one step at a time. So we gradually widen our circle of love and our circle of inclusiveness. And as we do it and we make little steps, we learn to trust the process, that it works, and we gradually can increase our capacity to accept, to include. And forgiveness for ourselves and for others will come as a fruit. So thank you for your listening.